Welcome to today's presentation on mastering property lease agreements in South Africa. I'm excited to share with you valuable insights into the lease agreement process, different types of leases, and essential requirements to make a lease agreement legally binding. Let's start by understanding what a lease agreement is. Simply put, it's a legally binding contract between a landlord and a tenant that outlines the terms and conditions of renting a property. Clarity and specificity are crucial in lease agreements to avoid disputes down the line. There are various types of lease agreements, each tailored to specific property types. These include residential leases for homes, commercial leases for office spaces, industrial leases for factories, retail leases for storefronts, and mixed-use leases for properties with multiple functions. Residential lease agreements cover renting properties like apartments, houses, or condos. They include clauses on rent amount, duration, and tenant responsibilities. For instance, pet policies, maintenance duties, and security deposit terms are commonly included. The rent amount is the monetary value paid by the tenant to the landlord in exchange for the right to occupy the property. It is typically agreed upon in the lease agreement and can vary based on factors such as the property's location, size, condition, and amenities. For example, a property located in a high-demand area with good infrastructure and amenities may command a higher rent compared to a similar property in a less desirable location. Rent can be paid on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly basis, depending on the agreement between the landlord and tenant. The lease duration refers to the period of time for which the lease agreement is valid. It can be either a fixed-term lease, which has a specified start and end date, or a periodic lease, which continues on a rolling basis until either the landlord or tenant gives notice to terminate. For example, a fixed-term lease could be for 6 months, 1 year, or even longer, whereas a periodic lease might continue on a month-to-month basis. The lease agreement should clearly specify the duration of the lease to avoid any confusion or disputes between the landlord and tenant. Landlords have certain legal obligations to fulfill under South African law, including maintaining the property in a habitable condition, ensuring the property complies with health and safety standards, and making necessary repairs. Examples of common landlord duties: for instance, landlords are typically responsible for structural repairs, plumbing, electrical systems, and ensuring the property is safe and secure for the tenant. It's important for landlords to be aware of their legal responsibilities to avoid potential legal issues or disputes with tenants. Tenants also have responsibilities outlined in the lease agreement, including paying rent on time, maintaining the property in a clean and undamaged condition, and following any rules or regulations set by the landlord. These may include keeping the property clean, reporting any maintenance issues promptly, and not causing damage beyond normal wear and tear. Tenants must adhere to the terms of the lease agreement and comply with all relevant laws and regulations governing rental properties. Pet policies outline whether tenants are allowed to have pets on the property and any restrictions or conditions associated with pet ownership. These may include requiring the tenant to obtain permission from the landlord before bringing a pet onto the property, paying a pet deposit or additional rent, and ensuring the pet does not cause damage or disturbance. Landlords may need to consider the impact of pets on the property, while tenants need to understand and comply with any pet-related rules set forth in the lease agreement. Both landlords and tenants have responsibilities related to property maintenance to ensure the property remains in good condition throughout the lease term. Maintenance clauses may specify who is responsible for routine maintenance tasks such as lawn care, pest control, and minor repairs, as well as procedures for reporting and addressing maintenance issues. Clear communication between landlords and tenants regarding maintenance responsibilities can help prevent misunderstandings and disputes during the lease term. A security deposit is a sum of money paid by the tenant to the landlord as security against any damages to the property or unpaid rent during the lease term. Examples of security deposit terms may include the amount of the deposit, conditions for its refund, for example, deductions for damages or unpaid rent, and the timeline for returning the deposit after the lease ends. Landlords must adhere to legal requirements regarding security deposits, including deposit limits and procedures for handling and refunding deposits, as outlined in the Rental Housing Act. In addition to the key components discussed earlier, lease agreements may contain various other clauses addressing specific issues or concerns relevant to the property and the parties involved. Examples of common clauses may include clauses related to subletting such as Airbnb, noise regulations, parking, utilities, and termination procedures, among others. Both landlords and tenants should carefully review all clauses in the lease agreement to ensure they understand their rights and obligations before signing. Commercial lease agreements, which include offices, retail or industrial spaces, are more complex and may involve longer terms, triple net leases, and build-out allowances. Key clauses often revolve around rent escalation, subleasing permissions, and exclusivity rights for tenants. Commercial lease agreements typically involve longer terms compared to residential leases. While residential leases may run for 1 to 2 years, commercial leases often span 5 to 10 years or even longer. A retail tenant, for example, may sign a 10-year lease to ensure stability for their business and establish a presence in a specific location. In a triple net lease, the tenant is responsible for paying not only the rent but also the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs associated with the leased property. Tenants in triple net leases have additional financial responsibilities beyond the base rent, which can significantly impact their operating expenses. Build-out allowances refer to funds provided by the landlord to the tenant for customizing or renovating the leased space to suit their business needs. Build-out allowances can alleviate the financial burden on tenants for initial setup costs and help them create a space tailored to their specific requirements. Rent escalation clauses dictate how and when the rent will increase over the lease term. Common methods include fixed increases, percentage-based adjustments, or tying rent to the Consumer Price Index or CPI. A lease agreement may stipulate a specific annual rent increase of say 3% or adjust the rent based on changes in the CPI to account for inflation. Subleasing permissions outline the conditions under which a tenant can sublease part or all of their leased space to another party. Landlords may restrict subleasing to maintain control over the property and ensure that subtenants comply with lease terms. Exclusivity clauses grant tenants the exclusive right to conduct certain types of business or sell specific products within the leased property. A retail tenant, for example, may negotiate exclusivity rights to prevent the landlord from leasing adjacent spaces to competitors. However, in recent ruling by the courts, this has become near impossible as landlords have won cases in which such exclusivity clauses have been voided by the courts for anti-competitive behavior. There are several other commercial clauses which could be included in a lease agreement, such as assignment clauses which govern the transfer of lease rights from one party to another. They outline the conditions under which a tenant can assign their lease to a third party. For example, a tenant may seek landlord consent before assigning the lease to ensure that the new tenant meets certain criteria. Commercial leases typically specify the respective responsibilities of landlords and tenants regarding property maintenance and repairs. Landlords may be responsible for structural repairs and common area maintenance, while tenants may be responsible for interior maintenance and repairs related to their leased space. Now, let's talk about the legal requirements for lease agreements in South Africa. Compliance with local laws, such as the Rental Housing Act and the Consumer Protection Act, is crucial for validity and enforceability. Essential clauses make lease agreements legally binding. These include details about parties involved, property description, rental amount, duration, renewal and termination procedures, deposit requirements, and more. Other critical clauses cover maintenance responsibilities, utilities, insurance, right of entry, subletting, and dispute resolution mechanisms. Clear and explicit language is necessary to avoid ambiguity. When drafting lease agreements, it's essential to tailor them to specific property types and seek legal advice. Comprehensive agreements mitigate risks and ensure both parties' rights and obligations are clearly defined. Negotiation strategies are crucial for reaching mutually beneficial lease agreements. Both landlords and tenants should address concerns and find compromises that meet their needs. Regular inspections and documentation are essential for ensuring compliance with lease terms. Proper enforcement mechanisms help handle breaches or violations effectively, protecting both parties' interests. In conclusion, mastering property lease agreements in South Africa requires understanding the nuances of different lease types, complying with legal requirements, and drafting comprehensive agreements. By applying the knowledge gained today, you can enhance your leasing practices and maximize the value of your properties. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, happy leasing.
Thank you for being part of the EDPF Academy #1 Million Title Deeds project. We hope you will continue your journey to property ownership with us by registering for our Academy course at www.edpfacademy.app or visit our main site at www.edpf.co.ca for more information about EDPF.